European leaders are welcoming reassurances from Washington that the U.S. remains committed to NATO. Foreign ministers have been meeting for a second day in Brussels to discuss peace in Ukraine and how to build what they call a more lethal military alliance. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has dismissed suggestions that the U.S. is not committed to NATO as hysteria, but stressed that his European allies must substantially increase defense spending. This comes after President Trump accused Europeans of taking U.S. protection for granted and underspending on their own defense. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte reiterated Europe's assessment that Russia is, in fact, the greatest threat to the alliance today.
For President Trump coming in to say, I want to do the utmost to bring this war to a just and lasting end, I think is commendable. And that's what I'm saying. And they're working tirelessly to do that. For NATO, it's clear. For the whole of NATO, Russia is the long-term threat. Even if this war will come to an end, let's not be naive about Russia. Nobody is naive about Russia. But when it comes to ending the war, I think it is important that the Americans are trying this, working closely with the Ukrainians, informing and updating constantly the Europeans, the French and the Brits, coming up with very practical suggestions on the next steps if we would get to a ceasefire or peace deal. And I think this is exactly how the alliance should function.
Let's get some analysis with Elisabeth Braw. She's a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Transatlantic Security Initiative. She joins us from London today. Welcome to DW. Now, Mark Rutte there saying all of NATO agrees that Russia is its greatest threat. He includes the U.S. there. Is that view shared by the Trump administration?
Well, the fact that he dared to say it suggests that he has cleared it somewhere. Mark Rutte is not an inexperienced official. In fact, he is extremely experienced, which is why he was chosen for this role. And he was also chosen because he does know how to get along with Trump. So I think he will have cleared those comments before saying them. And we should also remember that at the moment, Donald Trump is let's say, less enthusiastic about Vladimir Putin and Russia than he was a few weeks ago. So Rutte is it seems on safe ground there, saying that, and also it's simply common sense. NATO exists to defend its members against Russian aggression. That is the whole purpose of NATO. So if he said anything otherwise, it would be major news.
Rutte says the U.S. Secretary of State gave a very clear message that Washington does remain committed to NATO. Do you believe Marco Rubio like Rutte seems to?
What Marco Rubio has tried to do at this meeting today is to calm his America's European allies and Canada. It is, I think, not an insignificant task for Marco Rubio to try to convince America's European allies and Canada that America is a good ally when just a couple of weeks ago, or a few days ago, in fact, America suggested that Denmark was not a good ally and that it might try to act against Denmark's interest on Greenland. So it is it's a massive diplomatic challenge to square the two, but at least Rubio today said that America remains committed to NATO, and in the scheme of things, that has to be seen as a positive thing. Obviously, in the 70 plus years that NATO has been in existence, saying such a thing has never been in any way brave or unusual. It has been just standard language within NATO, but we are not in usual times anymore. We are in fact in extremely unusual times. So the fact that he said that the United States remains committed in the scheme of things is a positive thing.
Exactly, and the fact that we're reporting on it kind of, is a testament to that. There has been, since Donald Trump returned to the White House, been a lot of talk about Article 5, the core principle of collective defense in case of an attack of a NATO member. Do you think the Trump administration would honor this in any case, or will assistance be conditional on member states increasing their defense spending? Washington is now asking for 5% of member states' GDP.
Yes, 5% when America itself spends 3.5%. So that in itself is notable. Now, when it comes to the Article 5 guarantee, what is really important to understand is that Article 5 is not just about the case in which, or the potential attack on a NATO member state, potential military attack on a NATO member state. Article 5 and the guarantees that go with Article 5 exist before any such attack. So if Russia interprets the current situation, the current atmosphere within NATO to suggest that America would not come to the aid of another NATO member state should Russia or another state attack, then it might be convinced to attack. So it's if we're talking about the moment when it happens, when such an attack happens, it's too late to start thinking about it. What NATO has to do and has done throughout its history is to constantly say, Article 5 is ironclad. If one of our member states is attacked, we will all come to the defense of that country. If that communication starts being less forceful, then other countries, Russia and maybe others, will start imagining that maybe Article 5 won't be as ironclad after all, and they will see it as an opportunity to perhaps attack a NATO member state. So deterrence is primarily psychological, and I worry that psychology of convincing the other side not to attack is being undermined by talk of Article 5 perhaps not being honored after all.
That's Elisabeth Braw from the Atlantic Council's Transatlantic Security Initiative. Thanks so much, Elisabeth.
Thank you.
Teri Schultz is following this meeting in Brussels for us. Teri, Russia's war in Ukraine is what NATO foreign ministers came to Brussels to work on, but this entire meeting seems to have been overshadowed by announcements coming out of Washington.
That's definitely true. Try as he might, and Mark Rutte is a very skilled politician, he just couldn't get away from the fact that European governments are very upset about President Trump's imposition of 20% tariffs on all imports from the European Union. Taken the fact that 23 of the 32 NATO allies are EU countries, nobody should expect that issue to stay on that side of town when it so seriously impacts the economies of European governments. Now, President Trump and Mark Rutte are telling these countries that they now need to spend up to 5%, at the very least 3.5% of their GDPs on their militaries. And the Dutch foreign minister, for example, said, yeah, we're willing to spend more on defense, but now it looks like with these tariffs, we may be spending that extra money on inflation. So governments are puzzled as to how the White House can expect them to have extra money to spend on their militaries while they're taking these measures that will reduce the GDPs of these countries. So they didn't get away from that today, even though, of course, this is related to Russia and the fact that all this spending is designed to make NATO less attractive as a potential object of aggression by the Kremlin.
We were also expecting a press conference from U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio at the conclusion of this meeting, but it seems he changed his plans. What's going on there?
Yeah, that was a bit strange. We were sitting in the press conference of Marco Rutte and getting messages for me in my email that said that the Rubio press conference was canceled. In fact, what he did was take the journalists traveling with him on the plane and give a very small press conference only to them while we were sitting in with the Secretary General. I can only imagine he didn't want to be peppered with the same questions that Mark Rutte was getting about the tariffs, wanting instead to talk about other issues. He did get one question. I've now read the transcript of what he discussed with these journalists, and he was asked, what about the fact that European markets are crashing? He said, oh, they're not crashing. And, the U.S. has been treated badly all around the world, and so President Trump was right to take these measures. A couple of other issues that are interesting to our audience. Secretary Rubio was asked about his meeting yesterday with Danish Foreign Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen, and Rubio said, what we really need to focus on here when it comes to Greenland is that the Greenlanders want to get away from Denmark. He certainly wasn't trying to mend any ties there with the Danish government. He said that he denied that President Trump has said he would forcibly annex Greenland, even using military force if needed. And he said, no, in fact, what he said was that he would only do that if another country tried to step in and take over Greenland. So that was a bit of a confusing message. If Europeans can take any heart from the comments by Secretary Rubio, I would say that he did indicate that the White House is losing patience with Russia, dragging its feet on peace negotiations with Ukraine. That's very much the viewpoint of Europe. So in that case, there may have been some coalescence of views on Russia's willingness to make peace in Ukraine.
Teri Schultz on that NATO meeting in Brussels. Thanks so much, Teri. Rubio told a young reporter that the U.S. is pushing for a stronger NATO.
And what is your message for young people in NATO countries?
That NATO is stronger than it's ever been. It's going to continue to get stronger because all the countries in NATO are going to spend more money and have more capabilities. So we're going to be a stronger partnership because our partners are going to be stronger.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Can
you.
we have a high five?
Hold on.
Thank you.
That's awesome.
Bye.
U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio there sounding unusually conciliatory in an answer to a child's question. I asked DW's Brussels Bureau Chief Alexandra van Namen if he was giving the same vibes to the NATO foreign ministers.
Well, it appears that it's the same vibes that he was giving to NATO's foreign ministers here. We have been speaking with many of them, most of them saying that they felt reassured by what Marco Rubio had to say. The Polish foreign minister, for instance, told us that he was very happy to hear that the U.S. is still committed to Article 5, the collective defense, and to the alliance in general. But of course, Nicole, we have to ask ourselves what it tells us about the state of the alliance when the fact that the U.S. Secretary of State is stating such a thing, something that used to be self-evident, is seen as a positive step here. And there are still rumors and reports saying that the U.S. may be thinking about reducing their role in Europe, that they may be thinking about pulling troops out of Europe, but that was, according to many ministers that we've been speaking with, not on the agenda here. However, it is important, of course, for allies to get more information. For that, it is important for them, it is important for their defense plans for Europe.
And the U.S. now wants NATO members to invest 5% of their national output in defense. That's not very realistic. We talked about that yesterday. If that doesn't happen, which it most probably won't, will that strong partnership Rubio is now praising then suddenly be up for discussion again?
That's, of course, the key question here, no doubt about that. And you're right that the goal of 5% of GDP seems out of reach for many NATO countries, because it would mean that they would need altogether to spend more than $1 trillion. And that doesn't seem to be on the cards now. But we heard from some of the ministers, from the Dutch foreign minister, for instance, who said that he considers this number just as an opening of negotiations. Some EU officials are saying that they expect the landing zone to be between 3.5 and 3.7% of GDP to be spent on defense. And of course, many ministers here were pointing to Donald Trump's tariff announcement, saying that such tariffs could have a negative impact on economy, that they could raise inflation. And one minister told us that he is willing to spend more money on defense, but he doesn't want to spend money on inflation. So this is, of course, a concern here as well.
Ukraine was, of course, also on the agenda. Let's listen to what European Union Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas said on how Europe's demands are being respected here.
It was stressed that nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, and of course Ukraine and Europe need to be agreeing to whatever is discussed because this is all happening in Europe. So yes, he was giving us assurances about this.
Alexandra, what else can you tell us about the state of peace negotiations and the U.S. relations with Russia?
Well, we heard from many foreign ministers here from Europe, and they were saying that Russia is continuing with their attacks, and they were accusing Russia of dragging their feet on talks, with the Canadian foreign minister even saying that there needs to be a deadline. And we also heard from the Ukrainian foreign minister, who told us that Ukraine is not the obstacle there, that it's up to Russia to show willingness to really be committed to any kind of ceasefire. So the Europeans are hoping that they were able to convince the U.S. Secretary of State that it's Russia that has so far not shown any willingness to really be committed to a ceasefire.
As DW's Alexandra von Namen in Brussels. Thanks so much, Alexandra.